Welcome to EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Our website is econtalk.org, where you can subscribe, comment on this podcast, and find links and other information related to today's conversation. You'll also find our archives, where you can listen to every episode we've ever done going back to 2006. Our email address is mail@econtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. Today is July 24th, 2014, and my guests are Reid Hoffman and Ben Casnocha. Reid is the co-founder and executive chairman of LinkedIn. Ben is Reid's former chief of staff. Together with Chris Yeh, they are the authors of most recently The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Networked Age. Reid and Ben, welcome to EconTalk.
Great to be here. Good to be here.
Let's start with the origins of LinkedIn. What was the original concept? It's surprisingly to me, maybe to you, it's over 11 years old, correct? So how did it start?
Well, not surprising given I lived it. But the kind of the high line was the way that I ideate about things is I think about what is the world as it should be given certain kinds of technology. I've been thinking a lot about over the decades about identity, networks, and how this helps us navigate having better lives, both as individuals and society. And so after I helped sell PayPal to eBay, I was like, well, what should I do with, and this is new language, but my new tour of duty, my next tour of duty? I said, well, actually, in fact, I see this future in which it's much better off for every individual to have a public professional identity, a network that are associated with it, applications built on top of it. Most people don't see that right now, but I do think that they individually and as companies and as society are all better off of that. And I think I have an opportunity to create that. And so as opposed to taking a year off, which was my initial plan post PayPal, I took 2 weeks off.
Which you earned, I suspect.
Yes, it was a
little bit intense.
It was very intense. And so I took 2 weeks and went and visited a friend of mine in Australia and stayed at his beach house, and then came back and started LinkedIn.
And your original concept, you've given it a broad outline, but how did it start when it was actually up and going?
Well, part of how you do consumer internet, the vast majority of consumer internet companies is you think of what is your minimum viable product by which you can launch. You have to have answers for questions like, how does it spread? How do people encounter it? What are the first value propositions? And even though we knew that there was going to be this entire stack of things, including things that we work on today, which is like, how do you have the best business content for every individual, the relevancy from getting from shares, from their network and everything else. Even though we knew all that, we didn't start with any of that. We started with, you have a profile, you have a network of people around you, you have an ability to do search, you have an ability to communicate. And we just started with that. And so the first, say, month was what is the minimum viable product that we can launch such that we can iterate as we go. And
being an academic, I don't use LinkedIn perhaps as much as I might. When I looked at it originally, I thought, well, this is just a place you post your resume, right? This is a place, it's like a bulletin board. Is that how you saw it initially? Because it's certainly much, much more than that now, but that was how it looks for an outsider hearing about it in, say, 140 characters.
Well, we knew that would be the first interpretation of it, and we knew that would be the first solid business model part of it. We knew that when people say, well, I have a public professional identity and I have a network, what do I most use that for? Well, like job searching or recruiting. And we knew there would be economics associated with that. But part of the reason that we knew, like I've been talking since the very beginning about network as a platform, is because your identity and your network is a platform for a set of applications that help you work better, help you navigate your career better, help you be better informed. And we knew that was, we built that into our data structures. We knew that was part of where we were going from the very beginning, even though we actually focused for years on just solving primarily the work circumstance. Now, from very early, most people, I'll give you 2 examples of how most people don't know how to use LinkedIn. And in fact...
You mean even now?
Even now.
It's possible. I have a profile. Evidently, you're supposed to have a picture on it. I don't. I will fix that before even this airs.
A picture is useful, and that will condition which of the 2 things I say first. So the first thing is, if you ask most people, do you understand that you're living and working in a networked age? They'll say yes. They'll wave to their cell phone. They'll say, here, see, look, I'm connected. To have a strategy in a networked age, you have a strategy for how you're being found. because there's millions of people out there. And of course, you don't want all million to contact you, but the relevant people, the people who are thinking about something that could be really interesting to you. Could be a business opportunity, could be a job, could be a piece of intelligence, could be a person for your show or something. Like, how are you found the right way? Now, you do the podcast and else, but searching for people, searching is part of what happens in a networked age. And how are you discoverable?
Yeah, that last part's the part you forget about, because you're usually seeking. You're forgetting that people are looking for you.
Yes.
Well, it's actually one of the amazing things about LinkedIn
This is Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, to get people to update their resume when they're not looking for a job was actually a profound accomplishment. I mean, that was really a shift for people, right? I'm not actively looking for a job, and yet I'm going to continue to update my profile in pursuit of being found in some kind of abstract, long-term way.
Yes. Well, and abstract in that you don't know exactly what you're hoping to be found for because you don't know of those millions of people. But sometimes the absolute best things come in that way. And that's super important both for you and for your company, because being found sometimes helps your company a whole bunch as well.
Yeah, and we forget about this. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think those of us who are not paying close attention to LinkedIn, I mean, one of the most extraordinary things about it, looking at it as an economist, is that it lets you look for a job in a quiet way without looking for a job. And as an economist, I look at that and I think, well, that reminds me of Ronald Coase, because Coase is about transaction costs and how transactions costs disrupt markets. And what LinkedIn does more than anything, it seems to me, is lower transactions costs, which means more transactions, which means people put in better places where they're more productive, more happy, et cetera. It's a good thing.
Yep. And actually, so by the way, all of most of the economic thinking was there from the very beginning. So the lowering transaction costs, the increasing transparency, increasing liquidity, but also, by the way, one of the really key things is adding in reputation. So the fact that, for example, someone who is diligent, who essentially does their work, is a good collaborator, doesn't have anger management problems, goes the extra mile in order to get to outcomes, that reputation now is much more discoverable. It's much more shareable, as is the inverse. And by having essentially reputation, that also increases the trajectory for good people and creates the better allocation of great assets to great projects.
And the incentives for bad people to be good people, which sometimes isn't a matter of skill, but a matter of diligence or focus. Or one thing I think about, I'm sure you guys thought about this a lot, is a lot of what we're talking about in the networked age, from Yelp to Google to Amazon Books to LinkedIn to Airbnb, is about relying on the ratings of others, users, people who've actually experienced the product rather than experts who say Consumer Reports that tells you the best dishwasher. That's a glorious thing. At the same time, it's hard for people to be honest sometimes in those situations. I've had people tell me, oh yeah, Airbnb, everybody gets a rave because people feel guilty. They've stayed in their house. Can't really say bad things about them. I know that on Uber, if if a driver gets less than a 4.6, he's fired. So it makes me worry. It makes me feel guilty giving a guy a 4. So similarly, without naming names and without naming details, I've been praised for skills, endorsed for skills I don't have. How do you? There's a lot better way to say this. There's a lot of noise in the LinkedIn reputational stuff. How do you think that plays into the effectiveness of it?
Well, many of the reputation pieces, especially like the skills endorsements at the very early, it's kind of like a 0.5 version of the feature. And there's things that we need to build in that help enhance like, for example, you've been endorsed as an economics, as an expert in economics by people who themselves have economic skill, that kind of thing, or the kind of natural evolution in order to make that better.
Yeah, that should be worth more points.
Yes, and then more featured more prominently, part of the reputation when you look at the profile, these sorts of things. And so there's a bunch of stuff to build towards. Now, that being said, a frequent comment that we get is we also have these kind of the equivalent of book blurbs kind of endorsements. And they say, well, those are all positive. Like book blurbs, by the way, which are all positive.
Strangely enough.
Right. But there's still useful intelligence because it says that someone's willing to go on the record, who they are with their identity. They say this is something that's important, and that's a valuable additional source of intel when you're trying to figure out, should I approach this person? Should I do business with them? And that's what there is some noise, but there is valuable signal you can discern there as well.
So let's go back to the evolution of the site. When you started, there were a lot of people doing stuff like what you were doing. Friendster, MySpace, Facebook. Some of them fell by the wayside, and a couple of them got really, really big. Why do you think that, besides the fact that you're really smart, why do you think that happened? What'd you do right? You can mention what you did wrong along the way if you want.
Well, the primary thing that we did right is we stayed current to our vision, which was we are about people's economic lives. We're about their career. We're about how they work. And so, for example, I got from friends of mine, from highly intelligent commentators, I got told all the time, like, you're being an idiot. You should put social games on it. You should do all these things. You don't realize, look at how big these things are getting. You should do that. And I was like, no, we're staying to what our value proposition is, what our promise is, the thing that where it is we play a role in people's lives, and we're focused on that. And that was seriously important, right?
How hard was it to ignore those?
Well, it's hard because when people adopt technologies, they generally don't start within the productivity suite. They start within entertainment. They start within kind of consumer. They start within optional. So it's photo sharing is easy. Social games is easy. And it's kind of like, look, I'll go play with it. I don't like it. I'll stop doing it. Things that, like, for example, affect my economic life, like, well, how will I be looked at if I have a profile on LinkedIn? Because if it goes down, that's a seriously important thing. So people are much more risk averse, much more hesitant in order to do that sort of thing. And that's the reason why everyone else thought they were being just product geniuses. Like, for example, a common thing I hear about LinkedIn is like, well, LinkedIn's boring, right?
Stodgy.
Yeah, exactly. And you go, okay, look, maybe it's true because we're not focused on pictures. We're not focused on entertainment. We're not focused on kind of like 5 minutes of give me like an adrenaline hit. We're focused on how do we help your work? How do we help your career? How do we help, kind of add value to what you're doing over, days, years, decades. And that sometimes means we don't invest in something that's kind of lightweight and entertaining. We invest in other kinds of things. That has, I think, been very successful for us in terms of staying focused on the long term. Now, I think some of the things that we did wrong is we launched our groups product too early. Groups is an important part of work. It is an important trade associations, company alumni groups, university alumni groups is all important. We launched it very early because we were worried about some competitors that were trying to compete with us by doing groups.
Sure.
And actually, in retrospect, what I would have done is said, no, let's wait until groups are right. Like until the right thing, and we really put a lot of work into them, which is what we've been doing for the last year, right? And hopefully we'll continue. But that would be the kind of thing that we did wrong.
Reid, you said there are some competitors early days of LinkedIn that actually had a very different thesis that every individual is going to have their own individual identity. Again, it's something that seems so obvious now, but early days to have your own page that existed for you as your own kind of personal brand. Yep. What was the company that was linking it to your, basically whoever you worked? That was the identity?
Yeah, there was 80% plus of actually our competitors, because we didn't look at the social networks competitors. We looked at Rise and 0 Degrees and a bunch of other things.
That were doing what?
Well, some of them were doing. Rise was a little bit more like us. 0 Degrees and Visible Path were both in the category of your company owns your network, right? Yes, it's a networked world, but it isn't you having your individual identity. It's you are part of a company.
And that's really, in a way, that's why Gmail became so attractive, because it wasn't your company's email address anymore.
Yes.
Or your schools or whatever it was.
Exactly. And what I knew to be right, and this is actually part of the intellectual foundation of the Alliance as well, is what I knew to be right is it's how do you align interests between the individual and company. It's not that the individual is subsumed in the company.
Correct.
It's the individual has their own identity, their own persistence that goes with them their entire career. Even if they work their entire career at a company, happens less and less these days, but even if they do. And then the company should view the individual's network as assets that the individual brings into play in just like their skills and everything else, but they're the individuals. They're not the companies, right? And that when you get an alliance, you get an allegiance between them, then great things can happen.
How much of the evolution of what is there now came from that original vision versus user experience and what you saw they were looking for that you weren't providing and decided to provide?
95% of the features and everything else we've done were all part of the initial conception. There's a bunch of things that are also part of the initial conception that aren't on the site yet. There was a relatively robust, like you really take what is this vision of individuals having an independent brand, network and identity aligned with companies, projected over time, and what is that a platform for? We had all of those. Now, the details, the order in which they came, the way that the minimum viable product, the way that they were iterated, all of that came from market feedback. All of that came from, now it's time. Like, I'll give you an example of something that launched much earlier than we were thinking. We thought we were going to be completely individual for years and years and years. And we started having companies come and knock at our door and say, how do we buy your product? We want to buy your product as a company. And we're like, we were expecting you to call, but we were expecting you to call like 3 years later. Not right now. So what we did is we said, let's mock up something. Let's put these two engineers in a corner, build up something specifically for companies, and let's hire a salesperson, and let's see how that goes. And let's go, that's going really well. Okay, let's invest a bunch more in that. And then, so timing and sequencing.
That was a recruiting product.
That was a recruiting product, yes, very specifically.
But how much, for example, now, originally, and still, I think a lot of people think of LinkedIn as a job search company, but you're much more than a job search company. You're a way people find people they want to do business with. Salespeople use it, not just recruiters, and in dramatically different ways than people had access to information 10 years ago. Did that come from the beginning? Did you see that as the part of the vision?
Yep, because the idea is what happens when you tie search to a trust network, and how does that affect all forms of business? So this is the other thing. I told you I was going to tell you 2 ways that people don't understand the networked age and LinkedIn. This is the other one, which is basically take something some problem you're trying to solve, go to LinkedIn and type in some terms that are appropriate to that and search around your network. Literally every single person I've done this with every single time has been surprised going, so-and-so is 2 degrees out from me and they could be really helpful. They could take the time that I'm trying to solve this problem from 3 hours to 15 minutes. I can ask the person I know, is this person really good at it? Should I talk to them? I can get an introduction to them. And yet very few people do that because they don't think that they're living and working in the networked age. And so that problem set, look, this goes all the way back to one of my co-founders, Jean-Luc Vaillant, and I had a conversation like a year and a half into LinkedIn where he's like, I totally get this for a recruiting case, but really, how should I tell my friends about how to use this? I was like, what kind of problem are you trying to solve? He's like, I'm trying to figure out right now if we should use this new kind of hosted data center. And I forget the terms, this is years ago, like a decade ago. He said, okay, these terms. And I went and typed them into his account. And I said, okay, these 3 people who are 2 degrees away from you, would it help you to talk to them? And he's like, yep. And I was like, and could you ask the person, does a person that you know in between them, would that person be a good judge if they were expert and be able to give you a good introduction? He's like, yes. Your problem just goes from weeks to days.
Well, most people don't even think about 2 degrees away. It's funny how natural that comes, but it is the profound difference between LinkedIn and Facebook, right? Facebook shows your friends, and that's it. Yeah. LinkedIn, from the very beginning, you had this 2 degrees, 3 degrees of separation, and so it really made central the idea of you can get an introduction and have a warm referral into somebody who can help you, and your network is bigger than you think.
Yes.
It also
was our first tagline.
Yeah, that's nice. It strikes me that, for those of us who blog or have a podcast, we have a broadcast medium, but where we can ask people stuff, we can get our problems solved. People do it in blogs all the time. I don't think most everyday people don't realize that they have such a megaphone if they want to use it.
Yes, and it's all levels. It goes up from, for example, a step up is just having a LinkedIn profile. It's a very light. It's not a megaphone. Maybe it's saying a word, and then it kind of scales up. And you can. I actually think, generally speaking, it's wise for most people who are ambitious in their career to think about how they participate in social media. They may elect to do very little. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. But what is your strategy for being found?
Yeah. But of course, some people don't want to be found, as we know, and being found makes them uneasy. They also, I just think about my wife, who's just has a religious aversion to being on social media, and it gets lonelier and lonelier. People say, "Did you see this? Where'd you get that?" Everybody's seen it. It's a different world, an amazing thing.
Well, it becomes a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah,
I actually think that if you take the networked age and you say, I don't want to be found, it's a strategic and ongoing structural disadvantage.
Yeah, well, it depends what your goals are in life, but in many areas, for sure. I was talking to a person in sales the other day, and he said most salespeople don't like technology. they view it as, I think they view it as sort of like cheating. It's like, I just use my charisma and my charm, and I remember everything I need to. Maybe I have a notebook, but the idea that that's a disadvantage, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, I saw from data from last year that LinkedIn has 225 million members. The U.S.
We publicly announced over 300.
Okay. The U.S. at the time was 77. What are we at?
I don't actually know what the public number
Doesn't matter.
Yes.
But the U.S. is not half, which is surprising, perhaps. Is LinkedIn used differently outside the United States than in the United States? We have a very unusual business culture. Do you see those differences? Do you know of them?
Well, first, let's start that we designed LinkedIn to be the right economic system, right? So we actually, even though we're rooted in American culture and whatnot, and obviously that informs some of our decisions in ways that we're blind to and we try to correct for, the actual thing is what's best for the individual, for the company, and for the society on an economic basis. Well, how should the system work? That's what we build to. Now, such that we do have, some areas which are massive. So, for example, for years, the highest per capita usage of LinkedIn was actually in the Netherlands. The Prime Minister of Netherlands was the first government official who started using it actively, not just having their staff set up, but I use it, and I'm using it for things. And that's because small country does a lot of cross-border trade, is used to the notion of actually, in fact, we have to be out there in the network, and so intense usage. Singapore, also very similarly, intense usage. Other countries, Japan, for example, well, even though the job landscape has changed, and even though the whole salaryman, you live there, you work there, it was one company your entire life, has radically fallen off.
Correct.
It's still, it's a little shameful. Like for example, one of our earliest, we got a pitch from a Japanese company that we really love your product. We want to do a joint venture in Japan. The one thing we have to do is we have to remove people's names. Right? You're like, no, that's not our product. We want a different product, but our product has real identities.
Yeah.
Right. So.
In Japan for many years has been pseudonyms, right?
Yes. Well, because all online has been pseudonyms because.
It's a really interesting cultural.
Yeah. As a cultural phenomenon, that's kind of that's an issue. And Korea has some, challenges in terms of what it looks like loyalty to the company.
Now, LinkedIn appears to me, tell me if I'm wrong, to be mainly for educated people, white-collar occupations. Is that true? And do you see an opportunity for LinkedIn or another product to help coordinate work activity for blue-collar workers?
So we think that the blue-collar workers is a long-term part of the strategy. It starts with the high end, the people with the most elite skills, most in demand, highest kind of career prospects. There's the natural intersection of why companies would use the product, for why individuals use the product, and that's why it starts there. Ultimately, LinkedIn should be useful for anyone that has some notion of career, some notion of getting better at their job, some notion of making progress. Because how do you invest in yourself? How do you get new opportunities? All of that, ultimately in networked age, comes down to identity and network. So LinkedIn should be applicable everywhere.
Yeah, I just think about unemployed construction workers in Nevada who maybe are still sitting there hoping the housing booms are going to come back, and they sit there. And they should move, some of them. A joke I've used before in here, the problem with some areas is luggage. You just need to get people out the door. They need to be someplace different. That's the best way to help them.
One of the terrible things about housing policy in the U.S., right?
Correct. Is it tends
to home, it's harder to move.
Correct. It tends to lock people in. People seem to forget that when they talk about the virtues of home ownership. It drives me crazy that home ownership is this religious, romantic ideal. It's silly. Just a house, just an asset, often a bad one, expensive one for some people, not the right one. But anyway, I just think about them thinking, there are jobs for my skills somewhere else, or there are skills I could acquire, and they don't know where they're just sitting there.
Or thinking about, for example, doing some internships, trying some other work. Even if you're saying, look, my long-term strategy, I think 2 years, the construction market's going to come back. What do you do while you're doing that? Do some freelancing, try some other things, right? So to have adaptability, have flexibility, in case you're wrong about the 2 years, in case you discover something that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest education or training problem in the workforce today? And do you see that? Do you look at that? Do you keep an eye on it? Because you're seeing these searches, so you know what people are looking for. You see what people are having trouble finding.
Well, we publish a bunch of things in terms of, like, for example, what skills are most trending at LinkedIn. What buzzwords not to use in your LinkedIn profile. Because people.
What would be one of those?
Let's see. I think leverage was one from last year.
Yeah, innovative.
Yeah, innovative.
Creative.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to use those? But I am creative and innovative. What do you do if you're one of those people? You have to find a synonym.
It's not very creative and innovative to use those words.
Okay.
Right.
Especially in succession, separated by commas.
Yes. Yeah. It's don't think of your public identity as buzzword bingo. And so
it's a bumper sticker.
Yes. And so but we do actually we work with entities like Hope Street Group to try to figure out how do you publicize what the terms are so educators can prepare for it, and governments can figure out how to do the right programs. I think the kinds of, obviously here in Silicon Valley, we tend to think a lot about, like, I'm a massive supporter of this initiative by Hadi Partovi called code.org, which makes sure that CS is taught in every high school. That doesn't mean everyone should be a computer programmer.
Computer science, yes.
Computer science, yes.
We're in the heartland here. You got to remember outside.
Apologies. But for example, obviously computer science software is changing all industries. Everyone should understand something about computer science, whether or not you become a computer scientist or not, or a programmer yourself or not. It should be in every high school. So those are kinds of things, but it goes across the. It changes based on industry. There's I don't know what the trends are, what's happening in the energy industry, and petroleum, but I'm sure there too. We see that because it shows up in people's profiles, it shows up in job listings, it shows up in what happens when a person gets a promotion, what do they add to their profile, these sorts of things.
So let's do a thought experiment. You're gonna take your year off now, and at the end of that year, you're gonna have a lot of deep thoughts, and then you're gonna run a high school. And you know that work is not the only thing people care about, but it's an important thing.
Yep.
Tell me what that computer science class there is going to do for me as a junior, say, because as seniors, they don't pay any attention. But say as a junior, and what else would you put in that school that would get people ready for their careers?
So I'd say 3 things. So the first thing is I would actually make, as part of classroom instruction, bringing in various professionals, teachers, everything else, and talk about what their work life is so that people have some visibility in it. So the whole notion of separating the academy from the work life is insane.
Bizarre.
Yeah, insane, right?
And failure of imagination is what bedevils so many people in thinking about they can't actually imagine more than 4 or 5 professions. So I love that.
Yeah. So
and they're usually preceded by law school somehow. So I know I got to go to college, but then after that, I probably should do something. It'll be law school, and then since I don't want to be a lawyer, I'll figure out something else. But
yes, exactly. So bring in a scope, have almost like a fireside chat, because so the person doesn't actually have to prepare. Really, questions you ask, like, what are the key skills? How did you learn them? How did you discover this? What did you think when you were in high school you were going to do? How did that change? So the people are going to go, oh, I get to see how to navigate this. Right? This is a little bit of, like, for example, what Ben and I were talking about in the Startup of You, the earlier book. The second thing is, in specific, obviously, if you have an aptitude for software and computer science, it's an enormously lucrative career. You should consider doing it. It can be done remotely. It can be done in many regions. People think that it's only Google and LinkedIn and Facebook and so forth. Actually, every company is hiring software engineers. Yeah. So, I am quite certain that within Caterpillar, there are software engineers. Right. And so, it's like, look, it's a very wide range. So that's why it's important to do it. Now, even if you don't have an aptitude for it, knowing it so you know how your job changes and industries change and so forth, so you're familiar with how software creates a different product, a different pattern of work within a company, is super helpful to you no matter what you're doing, even if you're, for example, being a barista at Starbucks.
Isn't that a hard thing to teach in high school other than through the school of life? I mean, you've learned, you know as much about that as anybody in the world. Maybe there's 3 people who know more, but you've seen a lot, learned a lot, both of you. It's hard to tell people that. So when you think about what you do in that classroom, it's hard to think about what that might be to give people that appreciation. What would you do?
Well, but this is one.
I'll bring you in. You don't have to run the school. You're just going to run the computer science part of the class.
No, I understand. But there's a bunch of online resources, and CS works this way. That's part of the reason why with code.org and various, there's a whole bunch of online things like Treehouse and other programs for doing this. Go and bring a whole bunch of, that's why all schools should be network connected. The Khan Academy, everything. There's a ton of resources out there, right? And so how do you bring those resources into the school in a way that you say, look, whether it's how to do it, the actual skills and the instruction, how to learn it and get tested on it, but also what to do with it. There are those resources too. Like, for example, you'll have podcasts like this one where the person's saying, here's how CS matters. Well, I'd go find those. I would clip them. I would make sure that that's part of what students are learning. So they go, oh, I get it. It's not just, oh, do I learn this little computer tricking game, but actually knowing this will help me no matter what career I go into.
You were on the Zynga board for several years. Do you think CS classes of the future are going to be Zynga games?
Some of them.
Are they all going to be gamified? And is that, because part of what I think is interesting is the motivation question. You're 15 years old.
Yeah.
You have a lot more years before you're going to be necessarily needing to earn income, and someone says CS is really important. How do you actually onboard them into an experience that's engaging?
Look, I think one thing, I agree. So yes, game dynamics, yes, more approachable content, yes, more bite-sized, yes, doable online like a Khan Academy and everything else, or one of my investments at Moto, all of these things doable. However, I actually think that one of the responsibilities for all teachers, including CS teachers, including computer science teachers, such as in this hypothetical experience, is to say, look, what is the economic future of your students really, really matters. And so it's it's beholden upon you to try to give the students as much access as possible to say, by the way, you're going to have to look out for yourself economically. You're going to have to look at it, and here's some ways to do it. And it shouldn't be, you should try to make it as interesting as possible. You should try to make it as engageable as possible, as understandable as possible. But you should be assembling resources however you can to help students understand that they are going to need to be economic actors. That's like almost everybody has that thing. And if they don't start understanding that soon, you're doing them a serious disservice.
So I'm going to push back on that. I'm going to bring in an essay that Ben and I were talking about before we started taping. There's a essay running around on the web. It's by William Desarevich. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. We'll put it up on the link to this episode. But it's a rant saying that the Ivy League is just now a networking opportunity for bright, inside-the-box people who really don't know how to think anymore. They don't see college as a thinking experience, a place to explore identity. And as a result, they're missing out. All they become focused on is getting a great job when they got out of school. So what's your response to that? How do you, Ben, you recently wrote a very nice post about getting meaning from life and meaning from your job. How do you reconcile the fact that if we focus on our careers and the startup of me, that we're going to have something other than a commercial material existence?
Well, the college dropout might want to comment on this.
Go ahead, Ben. You go first.
I'm not sure I actually completely understand your question, Rusky.
So Reid just made the case for, which is, I try to teach this to my kids. And by the way, one of the things parents can do is, since their schools aren't doing it, they can tell their kids what they do. I thought my dad all his life drank coffee and talked on the phone. Actually, he had a job. There was more to it. And I think it's important to talk to your kids about what you do and just to give them the experience of what they might want to do or might not want to do. But my question is that if you're constantly thinking of yourself as a brand, and if you see school as a way to enhance your brand, you're missing out on some things. And I wonder if you agree with that tension, and if that softens your interest in this sort of
vocational.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to actually just say one thing, just about Ben before Ben answers. So, look, Ben is so intense about kind of the going and accomplishing new experiences, doing things, that part of the reason he's essentially very entrepreneurial. He left college. He's like, it's time for me to get doing things, right? And so, he himself doesn't like brand whatever. It's I go accomplish things. Now with that,
I guess the thing, I agree. I've heard this critique a lot. Like if you turn high school into the high school experience is going to be bringing professionals to talk about their careers.
Just to get you ready for business school. That's what it's for.
Right. That you lose out on some kind of intangible experience of, as you put it, Russ, exploring identity and reflecting on the deeper questions. I actually think there's a lot of that learning that can happen in the world of work. I think the notion that in the workplace, as you pursue a career, you somehow have to stop thinking about those questions is actually quite misguided. And the exploration of those questions can often be more productive when pursued in concert with living in the real world, as opposed to we're going to lock everyone up in the classroom and read books and then just reflect on what really matters. So I think you can pursue them in tandem, and in fact, they can be mutually enriching in a sense. And so, and this is, and you've talked about this in other shows, Russ, how vocational has a bad rep and how that's so problematic given the trends of the American economy. But I think this is one of Reid's great contributions in terms of how he thinks about LinkedIn, and even users, members of LinkedIn, thinking about their professional lives in an expansive way, and thinking about how their career shapes their value system and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a mistake to think that reflecting on professional life means you can't also reflect on what really matters, what are my values. 100%
agree. I mean, I think whether it's a school context or a work context, the false dichotomy of saying, well, if you're focused on the business and economics, you can't be focused on the other. Yeah. So you're teaching students, you say, no, they should be paying attention to what their economic life and their economic identity is. But they can also talk about art and ethics and meaning and philosophy, and those are important too. And then when you get into work life, actually, in fact, you shouldn't say, well, I did that at school, and now I don't do that anymore.
I have to think.
And so many of the really interesting meaning of life questions come down to people, right, and how humans work together. And what I love about business is that it's all applied psychology all day long. Because you're working with people to create things. It really is an exercise. And so I think there's so much, I've learned so much more about how humans work together through business and real life rather than reading psychology textbooks and things like that, or Freud, or even philosophers. So there's something to reading those books, but you just learn so much about so many of those important issues through the world of work.
Yeah, it's an interesting niche that's, I don't think, being filled by anybody about what you just said. How do you, we all understand we learn a lot as we get older just from getting older and from those experiences, but nobody really tries to organize other than the show The Office. And that's where we mock it and watch it unfold in comical, satirical ways. But it's interesting that we don't think about, we talk about lifelong learning, but we don't think about ways to organize our thinking about these adult topics other than the occasional book like The Alliance, which we're going to get to in a second. But it's an interesting question. Let me ask a different question of both of you, which is, I argue, and I'll say it over and over again because I think it's true and important to remember, that this is in many ways the greatest time to be alive for a large number of people. In that, well, the two things that I see that are so obvious is, if you want to learn something, you can, in a way that you couldn't do 20 years ago. The opportunity to use information is unparalleled. But the other thing is that work is more exhilarating and more meaningful for more people, I think, than ever before in human history. Having said that, there are many people still who aren't part of that process. When you're here in Silicon Valley, we're taping this in the LinkedIn headquarters, it's so tangible, you can feel it. When you walk around, literally you can see and feel how dynamic the people and the ideas are here, and the things you hear about. But there's a big sleepy part where there's a bunch of people, especially at the bottom, who aren't getting a good education, can't be part of this because they don't get those computer science skills. Does that worry you?
Very much. I mean, I think that part of the thing that is beholden upon us as technologists, as inventors, as investors, as entrepreneurs, is how do we help create as much systems as possible to give as many people, as broad a swath of people, a shot, right? An ability to create. We talk about meritocracy, but let's make it real and possible. And so that's part of the reason why, all of the kind of online education efforts, the get connected to the internet, because it's kind of like say, well, how do you do that? Well, if everyone has a device, or everyone has access to a device, and the device has access to free education, at least, look, it's not as helpful as being in a classroom is doing it the right way, but at least you're getting them closer to having a shot at it. And as much as we can do in systematic, leveraged ways, we should do.
Ben, you want to comment?
It was just a question for Reid, because I never actually debriefed with you after your panel with Andy McAfee and Peter Thiel in Europe. How did that go? Because I know this is
what was the topic?
The topic's kind of future.
Andy's book, which is
Second Teenage.
Yeah. Well, his co-author's been a guest on the program, and Andy was part of a panel on the future work. And what do we do about folks who not just aren't contributing to this, which is, it can never be a large number, but people who aren't engaged in it, connected to it?
The principal thing there's many great things in Eric and Andy's book. And the principal thing, though, I think that it's a very good call to action, which is part of the reason I did the panel with Andy and talked to Eric and Andy about this every so often, is how do we then as opposed to technology being something that moves a lot of jobs out of the workforce, right? Which will happen. That's part of productivity. It's part of increase. That's a good thing to happen.
Yep.
How do you also have technology that also helps create channels of employment, helping get people be skilled, kind of educational stuff, helping create new kinds of jobs that create paths for people? And we have to think about that as technologists and inventors, entrepreneurs. How do we create that more? And I think their book is a very good call to arms on that.
Yeah. Any other comments on that, Ben? Okay, let's move to the Alliance. So it's a new book, came out, I think, this month or last month?
A couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
July 8th.
Yeah, and it's also a call to arms. It's suggesting we need a different relationship between employer and employee. So lay out the case.
Well, I guess I'll give some maybe more macro context given the show and your background, Russ. I mean, for most of the 20th century, companies in America anyway organized themselves and thought of themselves as families. And if you went to school and landed an entry-level job at a GE or GM or IBM, you would join the IBM family. And IBM would, in effect, guarantee lifetime employment and commit to train you and invest in you, and the employee, for their part, would pledge loyalty. Kind of let them be fully excited about being a company man. But in the last couple of decades, with globalization and technology and those twin forces, among many others, IBM and GE and GM can no longer afford to offer that kind of deal.
Yeah.
And I think what's most striking about the shift is, and we mentioned this in the book, in I think 1963, an exec at GE said employee job security is a prime company objective, which I always find so hilarious. You can never imagine an exec today saying employee job security is one of our top corporate objectives. And then in the early 1990s, Jack Welch said, if you want loyalty, get a dog. At GE, we have one-day contracts. Prove yourself every single day or you're out of a job. And that's because GE can no longer afford to make employee job security a prime company objective. But the problem with how companies have shifted from family to what we call kind of free agency is that in this free agent, minimalist, laissez-faire relationship, you're not actually building the trust and relationship with your employees that allow employees to do their best work or allow both sides to invest over the long term. And it's that long-term investment that creates innovation and actually creates the kind of adaptation that companies need to be competitive. And so, given that shift from family to free agency, the birth of the Alliance was, is there a third way forward, a better path forward that can involve the benefits of both prior models, still create an atmosphere where relationships and trust can develop like the family model, but still have the flexibility that companies seek in this kind of free agent model whereby you can move talent around, fire talent, hire people with different sets of skills in order to adapt to a global world. And so that's the macro context for why we felt we needed to do this book now, is to set forth a new framework for companies for this modern era.
And I think the thing I would add to that is people frequently, the real baseline of the Alliance is to say, recognize the fact that all industries, all companies are heading more to a place where a person works at a company for a while and then goes works at another company. That's undisputable trend, not just the U.S. It's true in Japan, it's true in Korea, it's true in Europe, it's true everywhere. It's true in China, right? And so the question is, given that's a fact, how do both sides play in a way that's great for both? Like, how do you take that fact and how do you make that an important part of the way that you actually get good results? And so what we said is, like, the problem is what's happened over the last 10 years is it's just not talked about. And so you essentially have these lies of omission, where in that conversation, like, people go, well, I kind of know you're going to work you might work somewhere else, but I'm not going to talk to you about it. Or I might work somewhere else, or you might, not have me working here, but we're not going to talk about it. And so therefore, with a lie of omission, you have a decrease in trust. And a decrease in trust means a lack of investment, means a lack of ability to coordinate, it means a lack of productivity. And so the question is, how do you get back to that trust where you have those kind of open conversations? And there are, in fact, we can be adults. We can have open conversations about this. And then that sharing of mutual interest now allows you to invest in the future and allows you to actually know, kind of how to play forward. Yeah,
my feeling is the way that a lot of companies cope with it now is they just pretend it's not there. We do that in marriage too, of course. We all, I think, have this ideal, which I'm in favor of that we're going to marry for life. It's not a very realistic ideal for most people. So it's an interesting question whether you should confront that or not. Most people would say no. You want to make sure there's a likelihood that it lasts. But in the workplace, where we don't have, I think, the same costs and benefits of divorce that we do in family, it's absurd that we don't talk about it openly and plan on it and act accordingly. So what's your solution? You have a simple idea to start with, but then it's got some rich components.
Well, so the book, what we detail in the Alliance is for how to think about this as a manager. Now, obviously, employees or people who are interested in being managers can also find the book useful, but or just students of companies. But it's basically to say the manager should start a conversation where it says, look, what our compact is we help you be lifetime employable. We help you with a tour of duty, a set of projects that help transform your kind of work and career prospects and economic potentiality. And in return, you invest very seriously in the company. And we agree that this is over kind of a project over a realistic time frame. Generally speaking, 2 to 5 years, but it can depend on the industry and the region and the country and all the rest of this stuff. And we will have open conversations about it, where we know that, part of what happens at a tour of duty is the company may say, well, that's not really working out, we're changing directions, or the employee may say, I've got this other offer from this other company or this other thing I want to do, and that's a perfectly fine thing, and both sides recognize that it's honorable. But that both sides also, and we wrote a post about this called the right of first conversation, which is say, look, part of our loyalty to each other about being on this team, because it's team rather than family together, that we will then say, well, we'll talk to each other first. Before we make a decision, we'll talk to each other and say, well, will we do another tour of duty together, right, so that we can have that kind of conversation. And we detail a bunch about how managers can have the conversation, about why managers rather employees should start it, and how paradoxically, because people are always worried about retention, how being open about this actually creates longer retention. Right, because people feel that you're looking out for them and you're having a work environment of trust.
Yeah, I always find it strange when a company gets alarmed that its employees are getting job offers. That should be a glorious thing, right? Yes. In which, as we understand, sometimes you would encourage your employee to take another opportunity.
Yes.
And you talk about in the book, which I find so useful and powerful, that sometimes that's actually good for the company. Not because you're glad to get rid of the employee, but because it could lead to other connections that are useful.
Yeah, so part of the thing that, again, once you realize that what happens with this change in workforce is that all companies have a large alumni base of people who are still very active. And, you spent this time together, you hopefully built an alliance of trust. Well, why not have that trust still be active? Why not still be able to help each other? Still have a relationship that's going? How do you have this kind of not lifetime employment, but lifetime relationship? They can help you with network intelligence of what's going on with industries. They can refer customers. They can refer employees. Now, frequently what happens when companies do this is they say, great, since you've worked here, you should do that for me. A relationship's bidirectional. So in order to have the employees, the now alumni still doing that, you should be investing in your alumni. And part of what we talk about is, like, here's how you keep the relationship alive. Here's how you help invest in them. Here's how they feel that a relationship's still active. And so when they go, oh, wait, this piece of intelligence, this is useful for the company, or this person, they may want to work there. They go, oh, I have a relationship. I should help facilitate that connection for the manager, for the company.
That really is the little-known secret of Silicon Valley, I think, which is how porous the walls are between a given company and its peer companies, and how active the intelligence flows from alumni back to companies and from employees to employees at other companies. Because as all the companies in the Valley are trying to adapt as quickly as possible, and to do so, you want information about a great new strategy for uploading address books more efficiently, or a better way to do search engine optimization, or you want to get a tip on a great new engineer that you can hire. And so much of the culture and policies and philosophies are structured on maximizing the intelligence that flows back and forth. And yeah, there are some risks that emerge from that. But what we argue in the Alliance is that you can actually coach your employees and develop a framework for enabling them to be powerful actors in the ecosystem, both while they're employed and then when they inevitably leave someday, to still be excellent sources of information back to you, and of course on the condition that you as the employer continue to help them in whatever their current problem or challenge is.
Yeah, the alliance continues.
I can't help but think of a couple things. One is the portrait of Steve Jobs at Apple in Walter Isaacson's book, which is very different. What's your thoughts on that relationship there? It's much more paranoid. People are not supposed to even talk about anything related to the company outside. It's very unporous.
Jobs himself was probably the most committed to network intelligence of anyone. He frequently met with founders and folks at other companies all the time. And so, Reid, I'll let you chime in. But one of the things that's interesting is he really took on the burden of network intelligence himself, perhaps to an extraordinary degree for a single executive, where he was constantly wining and dining founders and folks at other companies, gathering intelligence and bringing that back to Apple. The precise relationship he brokered with his employees was rather unique and I think different from most of the Valley.
Yeah, and actually, frankly, my view is as amazing and as strong and as transformative as a company Apple is and has been, it would be stronger if more of the employees were actually more connected to the other things that were happening in Silicon Valley, understanding what was going on with cloud services, understanding what was going on with search. I mean, like, for example,
as an Apple alum yourself, you don't have much ongoing.
Yeah, they don't actually do anything for alumni, for example, or there's no real connectivity tissue there, and I think you can see that in instance of their Maps launch, right? Like, if they had actually had connectivity to understand all these kind of cloud services and how to play and what the requirement was and all the rest of this stuff, I think they would have been much better served on the launch of Maps as just one instance, but there's a bunch.
Yeah. The other thing I think of when I hear about your ideas is the employee tells his boss, I've got a new opportunity, I'm afraid I have to take it. And the boss says, well, we'll be ushering you out of the building with a security guard by, you have 20 minutes, empty your desk. You're really talking about a different kind of exit relationship, right?
Yes, well, because the question is actually it's valuable to have the relationship with them post their employment. Now, if you think that something's wrong and you have to do an emergency circumstance because there are still some cases in which you would do that. But the question is, what kind of ongoing relationship you want to have with them? And frankly, you actually would rather have the whole we might issue you out. That causes your other side to be brinksman. So they come and give you, oh, by the way, I'm taking a job in 2 weeks. You have no transition planning. Yeah. You have no continuity. Right. You'd much rather have hey, come and talk to me months earlier. Spend time, like we detail with David Hahn in the book. Spend time kind of, how do you make that transition work well? Far better.
Because really the question for companies is how can you invest over the medium and long term? And to invest, you need to have some predictability about people being around. And even if they have another opportunity, they'll really make sure the transition's smooth in order to enable the ongoing investment. And so companies historically, in the family era, could count on all of their employees being there forever, and so they can make these really long-term human capital type projects work. But in the current era, companies are reluctant to do that. We even hear from HR people, they don't want to do any kind of training program. They want to slice, professional development budgets because we don't want to train them and then have them leave the next day, right? And so if you can have an open conversation and have trust whereby both sides can commit incrementally through a series of tours of duty, then I'll invest in you, the employee. I'll put you on a long-term project. I'll launch the project. I'll even train you because I know that you're going to stick around. And if you have to abandon the tour midway, I know you'll come to me as early as possible and we'll collaboratively work together to make sure that the project can endure.
And of course, you might come back, which people often forget when they burn those bridges the way they do.
Come back, refer someone, refer a customer. It's a networked age.
Yeah. It sounds great. One of the challenges is it seems to be a little bit monitoring intensive. So one of the challenges when I tweeted about this interview, somebody said, make sure you ask Reid and Ben about how you get people to take the long-term interests of the company into account if they're only serving a 2-year term of duty. And when I thought about that, I thought, well, you got to interact with that person to make sure that they're aligned with the longer-term interests of the company. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that it's part of, some parts of what we're describing, has historically been done for, stars who are on rotations within a company that are being groomed for upper management and so forth. And our recommendation is to bring that through as much of the company as possible but to make it a collaborative project between the employee, as opposed to like paternalists, where like we have a training program. It's like, no, we're collaborating together. And you may come and say, hey, I should go do this training or class, or I should get this skill, or I think this is kind of something that's going on in the industry and I should do that, and we should collaborate together. So that takes a lot of that burden down in terms of the management side. The second thing is that actually, in fact, look, having an active conversation about what the future of the company is, what the future of the individual is, that's just good management. If you're not putting time into that, you have a different serious problem. The techniques in the alliance are a way to do that in a high trust, high honesty, high effectiveness way of doing that.
Well, you write in there, one of my favorite lines in the book, great companies have specific missions that differ from those of their competitors. How do you get employees to buy into that specific mission?
Well, part of it is, everyone's been, this kind of like you earlier referred to The Office, has been part of companies that have said, our mission is we're the greatest technology company in the world. And you're like, okay. You're like,
now what?
Yeah, now what? What's that? And so part of it is you have some specificity about, for example, like at LinkedIn, it's connecting talent to opportunity, or realizing essentially the economic graph, which is, all economic skills, opportunities, deals, all realized in a digital space that you can navigate much more effectively. And when you say, well, this is what we're about, and we're not about other things, because to answer that question, you often say what you're not. And so when you do that, people can then visualize it. They can get behind it. They can go, okay, actually, this is part of my identity. This is real. This isn't just vaporware. It's just not an empty slogan.
Well, and there's an additional nuance to this per the Alliance, because actually your phrasing of your question, Russ, was revealing. You said, how do you get employees to buy in to the mission? And actually, I think one of the themes we're advocating here in the Alliance is you're both trying to get employees to sign up for an inspiring company mission. At the same time, you, the company, are trying to understand what that employee's personal mission or vision is in their own life, and trying to define a tour of duty that hits both of those missions at once, right? So it's no longer, subsume yourself to our corporate mission, rather than, hey, maybe your long-term vision is you want to start your own company someday. Or you're really interested in this other field in addition to this field. And so you're going to sign up for a tour because you care about our mission, sure. You really care about your mission, and we're going to make sure that this tour of duty helps you get closer to being able to fulfill that mission. But it's that recognition of the fact that there may be some difference, and that you're only looking for sufficient alignment for a specific tour of duty. Because I'm sure there are lots of employees at LinkedIn who find Connect Talent with Opportunity at massive scale really inspiring. And there are probably other employees that say, that's inspiring, but I'm actually really passionate about something else. And I'm doing a tour of duty here because I know I'll learn this specific skill that I'll then take with me when I go pursue that other mission. And that's actually totally fine.
Yep, that's totally fine. Although, by the way, part of what you do is you say, look, we understand this is a tour of duty with this mission. The person should still have some connectivity to the mission, even though there's this other mission that they have much more connectivity with.
Yep.
In many ways, the manager then becomes a counselor, a mentor, more than just how do I get the most out of this person. That's what I really see is the focus. Is that correct? And managers maybe aren't so good at that. I'm not sure they're good at the other thing either. But
well, I think the language we suggest is allies, and it may include mentorship, but the alliance can actually, in fact, be a lifetime alliance. And the part of the reason to get good at it, to manage that way, is because that lifetime alliance can improve both you as the manager and the employee. That can be massively beneficial over a career. And so you do have to learn the skills of being a good ally. You do have to learn the skills of preserving that trust and, for example, not just showing like, well, I only care what you can do for me here and I don't care otherwise, because otherwise then you're not a lifetime ally. But you do need to have those. And we think that the people who have those skills will be much more successful.
Do you believe in non-compete clauses in contracts? Which is a clause that says when you leave my company, you can't go work for a competitor?
Yeah. Broadly, no. It's one of the things that helps benefit Silicon Valley, because the usual non-compete clauses are actually not applied to giant company A with giant company B. They're usually applied to startups. They're usually applied to forking off. And actually that
they're not enforceable in California.
And they're not enforceable in California. Broadly not enforceable. Okay. There's little nuances. But, and so I actually think that the kind of the predatory rating is bad, like I go hire a whole department, that kind of thing. That kind of thing should be still penalized. But the notion of me as an individual, I can work where I best think I should work. I think that's part of what we are. That's a good economic system, and that's part of what's good for all of us.
And it helps everyone run faster. One of Reid's favorite lines is competition, and how it may be a competitor today on certain thing. I mean, the Amazon Netflix case today is the most extraordinary case of Amazon competing head-on with instant video against Netflix streaming, and yet Netflix running their entire business on Amazon AWS servers.
AWS being
Amazon Web Services. So all of the Netflix backend technology is on Amazon servers, while at the exact same time Amazon and a separate part of the company is launching instant video to compete with Netflix.
Yeah.
And that idea that you can actually cooperate on things and compete on other things is a really powerful but complicated idea that many people miss in the effort to bash competitors, or to be worried over a fact that an employee is now working at a competitor.
Yeah. Given that we live in a networked age, how do you think the Internet's doing? Do you think there ought to be less government or more government with respect to taking care of the Internet? Net neutrality, whatever's the next big thing.
Very positive net neutrality. It allows a lot of entrepreneurial innovation, actually creating, kind of ask for permission rather than forgiveness is a real quelling of challengers to incumbency. So I think net neutrality is good. I also think that the threats of the balkanization of the Internet are really bad. I think it's bad, actually, not just for entrepreneurs, but I think it's bad for consumers and countries. And of course, a decreased trust environment from Snowden and the NSA is a seriously bad thing. And I understand how that causes people to say, well, maybe we should balkanize the Internet. But I actually think having a more global Internet is generally better. So I think the Internet has been doing pretty well, and part of it, we should learn from what are the things that have done well and have gotten us to this really good place and make sure we preserve those.
Comment, Ben? You want to add anything?
No, I think it's inspiring to see what Google and Facebook in particular are doing in terms of trying to bring connectivity to parts of the world, people who are not yet connected. And I believe, I haven't seen the latest stats on how many people are online, but I believe there are more people coming online than have been online, right? And so it's still very early days in terms of what's this networked world vision that we've been talking about in this episode. I mean, it's still very early on to see how that will fully play out when you have billions more people participating in these networks together.
So you were both involved in venture capital, and not just LinkedIn, and recently had Sam Altman on the program, and we talked about the next big thing. We talked about health, wearables, Bitcoin, and then he talked about energy, which is where he thinks there's a big opportunities.
Did he go into thorium nuclear?
He didn't talk about it. He did indirectly, yeah. He talked about nuclear power. Where do you guys thumbnail on the next big thing? Are these the next big thing, any of these things, or are they just kind of fads?
I think that people overemphasize. I think wearables is interesting broadly. Love Sam. I agree with all that stuff.
Well, those are mine. Although Sam agreed, health. He thought health was big, wearables were big, and he thinks Bitcoin. He's still skeptical. And then he added energy.
So I think Bitcoin's very high beta, but potentially super interesting. I think wearables tends to be, because it's a little, people can visualize it a little bit more. I think it'll be a slower process than people think, although I think it'll be important. I think the things that you continue to add to that is actually, I think, the data revolution in terms of how, what is quote unquote called big data transforms the applications in the world. And like a simple one is like Waze, which is like traffic routing.
That's WAZE.
Yeah, and that's just big data creates applications that has you do navigations. Like one that I think is lost on that list is the intersection of biology and computing, personalized medicine, which medicines really work for your genetic type, what things are actually going on. I think that is, and it's both two directions. It's how do we read and understand, but also how do we make? And I think that's a massive transformation.
I agree.
Yeah, for me, the only thing I'd add on taking the medical team is cognitive science. We still know just so little about our brains, consciousness, and I'm very intrigued, and Reid has heard me talk about this now for a couple of years, in kind of cognitive superpowers. And
Well, Lucy is coming out I think this week or next with Scarlett Johansson. She uses more than 10% of her brain, and so she's got cognitive superpowers.
I didn't know that. I saw a billboard for that. I wasn't aware that was the plot.
That's what it's about. Okay. So just around the corner.
Yeah, very exciting.
Soon to a movie near you.
Yes, exactly.
No, seriously, what do you think is coming there in terms of cognitive?
Well, I think I think one of the most interesting ethical issues that are playing out in classrooms on Wall Street and increasingly Silicon Valley are the use of very easy to obtain drugs that help you focus, that help you stay up and not sleep. And I just think that's chapter one in a very long book of drugs to come and techniques to come that will allow us to hack our brains and do all sorts of things. And I think for people who are driven and ambitious, they seem to be willing to pay any price, both monetary as well as to accept a certain amount of unknown side effects to increase their overall ability to think and to do. So both from an entrepreneur perspective, is there ways you can continue to innovate on that front, but then also from an ethical perspective, how are we? And from even an inequality perspective, imagine if people who have the money to spend $200,000 a year taking drugs that make them think faster, that make them think more creatively, that make them only have to sleep 3 hours a night with no side effects. What is that going to do in terms of the inequality question? I think really complicated, really interesting, and we're basically starting to live it now. I mean, I have friends that take modafinil 2 or 3 nights a week, which are the drugs that Air Force pilots take when they start missions in the middle of the night to basically stay up for 24 hours. No side effects.
So it appears.
So it appears. But even longer term studies show no side effects. And
far. Because I have a friend who is in that sphere, and I'm a little worried about him because he says studies show no side effects. I'm thinking, how do you know?
Yeah. But it is the steroid era in baseball, of course.
Yeah, I was thinking
discussed. But the cognitive side of that's far more interesting and far more important in terms of society.
So basically the chess championship is going to be a test for modafinil or whatever it's called to make sure you're clean.
I'm surprised there aren't blood tests already for chess tournaments and the like.
Yeah. Well, I think that line, I agree with you. I think it's going to be fascinating. I think that line has already been so blurred. I mean, do you handicap? You only let a person study a few hours a night? I mean, where do you draw the line between what's called fair and unfair? It's going to be very difficult, I think, and it's all going to happen.
Agreed.
Last question, we're getting late. What's the next tour of duty for Reid and Ben that you can talk about?
Collectively or individually?
Yeah, individually. What are you doing now? What do you think you're going to be doing?
Well, for me, we're obviously spreading the word about the Alliance and helping propagate that around the world. And in terms of
what I'm here for, Ben. I'm here for you.
One of the things and Reid knows this, I've been spending and we both have been spending a lot of time thinking about the future of news, journalism, and information. I'm very, these sorts of podcasts are obviously just the beginning of what will be a large reinvention of how people consume information and learn. It gets back to our earlier discussion of the ideal high school classroom. Is there a way that you can better empower people to get information about what's happening in the world in a way that's actionable, that can allow them to improve their life as it's lived on a day-to-day basis and improve the world? Is there a business opportunity to do that? Is that just a philanthropic opportunity to blow up all the existing journalistic institutions and create something new there? That's something that's really interesting. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about those sorts of ideas as potential next chapter for me.
And one of the benefits I have of being a investor is I actually get to pursue additional tours of duty that are synchronous. So I obviously have a whole bunch of stuff I'm doing with LinkedIn, a bunch of stuff I'm doing with Greylock as a venture firm, but it could be a news thing with Ben. I've just recently announced an investment in Zappo, which is this Bitcoin wallet, because Bitcoin really attracts. So that's starting a tour of duty as a board observer in that, and so for me, I have a number of concurrent tours of duty because of the scope of what I'm doing.
Power of leverage, yeah.
And I'm sure you're only sleeping 3 hours a night, right?
A few more, but not enough. Not enough. Yes.
My guests today have been Reid Hoffman and Ben Casnocha. Gentlemen, thanks for being part of EconTalk.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Russ.
This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more Econ Talk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for Econ Talk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.